Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq, with daily insight on the Nasdaq-100 index, or the NDX, which is made up of 100 of the largest domestic and international non-financial innovative companies listed on the Nasdaq stock market. The NDX has been the barometer for U.S. large cap growth and also one of the best performing indexes over the last decade and a half, not to mention one of the most liquid index ecosystems in the world. Joining me is Shawn, Cruz, manager of trader services at Ameritrade, to discuss Tuesday's trading action. And Shawn, another day, another all-time high in the Nasdaq-100.
It was a little bit of a bump last night on some confusing headlines that we had out, but markets were able to regain their ground. We actually had pretty solid data coming out of Europe. We also had some pretty good news, not only just here domestically, but also on the international front, where the EU and China may be working on a trade deal. Then you start the day out today, and we had strong new home sales, which is a very important barometer for the economy. And then we also had some pretty good PMI data as well. But just looking at the NASDAQ in general, another day up over 1% continues to lead a lot of the other indices here over the past couple of days.
All right, if we take a look at our next chart, of course, that big bump coming from Apple, which also continues to hit all-time highs. I mean, WWDC gives the stock a bump every year, but what do you think? We think you're getting a little bit close to resistance here?
It looks like it. And one thing is stock is something that's very popular. It's widely held. Looking at Apple, there was a little bit of concern about how this year was going to go just in terms of product launches. We've seen some hiccups as far as new store openings. And I think the WWDC conference was extremely important to sort of assure investors that the company was on the right path. And if you're looking at the price action this week, it certainly seems like the market is voting decidedly that they do like what they're hearing out of Apple in the WWDC conference. They continue to make new all-time highs. And so I added the volume profile here. So those little blue bars off to the right sort of show you how much volume there is at a given price level. And we're sort of getting up into rarefied air here, where there is a little bit of thinning of volume, and that could lead to a little bit of exhaustion in buyers. And so I also looked at the RSI, the relative strength indicator, hitting above 70, and that usually it means overbought traditionally. But I think really what that means here is that maybe there's going to be less buyers coming in to continue to push it higher, but that might actually be good for Apple. If you could get some sort of a consolidation here at this price level, that could be what allows it to build a base to potentially make another leg higher. And that's what I'm actually going to watch for moving forward, is just if we can get some volume built up somewhere at this price level to show that this is a new valuation range that a lot of investors are ascribing to Apple.
Let's talk some economics here as well, too. You're looking at some GDP readings.
Yeah, so the PMI numbers that came out today are pretty closely track the quarter over quarter GDP growth. And so we are certainly trending in the right direction. And then whenever we look at PMI data, we always look at that 50 level. And we were actually approaching the 50 level now. When you think about it, in some of these PMI numbers, we were getting down into the 20s, even into the teens at some point. So seeing us move back into the mid 40s certainly shows that we're moving in the right direction. The manufacturing component here actually is right at 49.6, I believe, which is just below that 50 level. And that's important, because if we're going to be able to get any sort of sustained recovery and get second half, a return to growth here in the second half of 2020, we need to see data like this moving in the right direction. And the one thing I'll say is I like looking at the PMI data versus maybe some of the other New York Fed nowcast numbers, because they just take hard economic data that's coming in, and some of those are giving a little bit of a false positive reading because of the most recent employment numbers, where we had a pretty big jump, and a lot of that was more related to PPP loans than a read through an underlying demand from businesses needing to hire. So I like the PMI data because they're actually talking to managers and asking them what they're seeing on the ground. So it essentially gives a solid reading that we are certainly heading into the right direction going into the second half of the year. This week, look for confirmation Friday out of consumer sentiment, and especially at that forward-looking indicator of the expectations component of that consumer sentiment number on Friday. I think that's going to be very important.
All right, our final chat here, Sonos, hearing some buyout chatter. That's always exciting.
One thing that came out of the Worldwide Developer Conference for Apple was a research note that came out and said Sonos actually may be a good acquisition target for Apple, and it's certainly seen the market maybe vote some confidence. Typically, when you see something become a buyout target, there's usually a 20% premium attached to that. That's sort of just the starting point for any time you're going to buy a company. You got to pay 20% over that current price. And you've almost seen that out of Sonos this week. They're up over about 25% now. So the market's voting. Not only do they think it's going to happen, they actually think maybe Sonos can get an even higher premium than that normal 20% that we see. Looking in the options markets, the options are almost telling you the same thing. There's a lot of options activity, most of it on the call side. 22,000 calls traded hands by about midday versus only 3,000 puts. But a lot of that was buying. You could see a lot of that trading activity going on the bid prices, and that's really when you're going to see a lot of interesting activity. And the ask prices too, we're really showing that there's a lot of aggressive activity on the buying and selling side. But it certainly looks like there's a bullish sentiment just with the sheer amount of calls being traded. So it will be interesting to watch and see if there is some actual news that hits the wire that Apple maybe is going to buy Sonos.
Yep, time flies when you're having fun. I remember when it went public on the Nasdaq market just a couple of years ago. Shawn, great to have you with us as always. Thanks so much for joining me on Trade Talk.
Thank you.
All right, and thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.